Why does the Cretaceous period, the last part of the Mesozoic, correspond to both the apogee of the dinosaurs and their decline? Are you ready to plunge into the darkness of a lost world, where monstrous creatures lurked in the shadows, ready to devour anything that crossed their path? At the heart of this almost 80-million-year-old period, gigantic dinosaurs reigned as absolute masters. The terrifying Tyrannosaurus rex, with its sharp teeth and fearsome claws, hunted without mercy, while in the depths of the oceans, sea monsters such as the Mosasaurus and the Plesiosaurus stalked their prey, ready to drag them into the abyss. But the dangers were not limited to these fearsome predators. The Earth itself was in the throes of titanic upheaval. Continents were being torn apart. Mountains were rising and volcanoes were spewing forth their incandescent lava in a deafening roar, threatening to engulf all forms of life. Dear traveler, welcome. Today we're off on an incredible journey back to the time of the dinosaurs in the Cretaceous period. But before you set off on your next adventure, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and have a great trip. As we've seen during the first periods that define the Mesozoic, first the Triassic and then the Jurassic, the Earth undergoes many changes. The landscape changes, the climate varies, the flora and fauna evolve. Everything seems to be in perpetual flux. Over the course of Earth's history, we've seen how nothing is ever the same. While some plant and animal species disappear, others emerge and offer a new face to the ecosystem of our blue planet. But these explosions of aquatic and terrestrial life don't happen without a struggle. They often follow massive biological crises with devastating consequences. It can take millions of years for our planet to regain a semblance of equilibrium. The Mesozoic era saw a large number of extinctions. Each time, nature had to redouble its efforts to renew itself yet again. From its very beginnings, it has been marked by a major biological crisis, the one that marks the end of the Permian and the beginning of the Triassic, i.e., the junction between the two great eras of the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras. If the Triassic began with a major crisis, it also ended with the same catastrophic scenario. But the Mesozoic also experienced one last major crisis. As we'll see later in this video, the Cretaceous, and more generally the Mesozoic, ended on the same tragic note, with the fifth mass extinction. Like a phoenix, nature renews itself each time from the ashes. But nothing will ever be the same again. If nature renews itself, it will no longer have the same characteristics that defined it so well before. After a crisis, new landscapes take shape, and new species emerge to occupy new spaces and vacant ecological niches. The Mesozoic, marked by several major biological crises, is no stranger to change and upheaval. The Mesozoic era has undergone many twists and turns and has changed its face many times. From its very beginnings in the Triassic, flora and fauna have had to adapt and reinvent themselves to survive. This is how the dinosaurs came into being. They soon became the absolute masters of the land. Dinosaurs don't arrive alone. Mammals were their main roommates as early as the Triassic period, although dinosaurs were to occupy the majority of terrestrial territories. In the Jurassic, they even became the dominant species. But what about the Cretaceous? Does this domination continue? That's what we're going to find out as we explore the flora and fauna of this period, which marked a major turning point in the world of living things. Before going any further in our biological investigations, we need to find out where we are. When are we and where are we? What does our planet look like during this period? Does it resemble what we know today? To find out, let's jump back in time to the very beginning of the Cretaceous, 145 million years ago. The chapter of the Jurassic is now closed, and a new page is being turned on the horizon, that of the very last Mesozoic period. If the Triassic and Jurassic eras saw a great deal of upheaval and just as much radiation, the Cretaceous is no exception. It too is characterized by a large number of major biological evolutions and milestones in both the plant and animal worlds. While the flora and fauna of the Cretaceous are eager to tell us their story, let's take a look at the Cretaceous from a geological perspective. The Cretaceous is a long period, the longest of the entire Mesozoic, in fact, spanning some 185 million years, with the Cretaceous alone already representing 80 million years. The Cretaceous is the last system of the Mesozoic and extends from around 145.5 million years ago to 65.5 million years ago. It is subdivided into two subsystems. In geology, we speak of the Lower Cretaceous, which includes the Berriasian, Valanginian, Hauterivian, Birimian, Aptian, and Albian stages. Next comes the Upper Cretaceous, which includes the Cenomanian, Turonian, Coniacian, Santonian, Campanian, and Maastrichtian stages. For the record, the characteristic rock of the Cretaceous period in northern Europe, chalk, is called Creta in Latin. It was from this Latin origin that the period took its name. As you can see, this period is long and divided into numerous subsystems, 12 in all. Each has its own particularities. Over millions of years, the face of the Earth changes in step with its geological activities. Let's take a closer look together. We left behind a rather warm and humid environment in the previous period, the Jurassic. For the moment, the changes are still quite minimal and difficult to perceive. After a cooling period in the early Cretaceous, the climate becomes warm and humid again. At the end of the Cretaceous, temperatures average 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. By way of comparison, in 2024, we recorded an average temperature of around 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit on Earth. But that's not all. As you can see from this representation, there are still no ice caps. This means that the climate is still relatively warm, as it was for much of the Jurassic period. Remember, not so long ago, there was a single continent on Earth called Pangea, but in the course of previous eras and climatic and geological upheavals, this continent broke up. The emerged lands, heckled by the Earth's internal activities, gradually fractured. Two continents emerged, Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. But as you can imagine, towards the end of the Jurassic and the beginning of the Cretaceous, the continental waltz was far from over. In fact, it's still going on today. While the northern part of the planet has already continued its slow dislocation in the Cretaceous, new continents are also appearing in the south. If you take a close look at our planet at that time, you'll probably notice a few similarities with our current geographical situation. For the first time in Earth's history, the face of our beautiful blue planet looks a little more familiar. Speaking of the blue planet, as you know, most of our planet is covered by water. Look at that vast ocean we're flying over. It's impossible to see this detail with the naked eye, but it's very important. In the upper Cretaceous, sea level was much higher than it is today. To be precise, it was 300 meters, or 1,000 feet, above today's level. This changes many things. Some of today's land masses were drowned under the waves at that time. This is true of a large part of Europe, which unlike today formed a kind of archipelago. This high sea level also had an impact on the climate. So far, we've seen that vegetation in the Triassic and Jurassic periods in particular was flourishing and luxuriant. In fact, this is what enabled multiple species to grow, evolve, and develop. Up to now, the plants we've come across in earlier periods have mainly been conifers, which are also very varied, and ferns, which are just as diverse. But during the Cretaceous period, thanks to a climate that favored their evolution, plants underwent an evolutionary radiation that would forever mark the history of plants. Angiosperms made their grand entrance onto the plant scene. What does angiosperm mean? This term defines flowering plants. Now imagine how spectacular and extraordinary this change was for flora and fauna. Until now, plants were made up entirely of leafy species, some of which use cones, hence the name conifers, to reproduce. With the arrival of angiosperm plants, vegetation took an unprecedented turn, opening up new prospects for evolution. Flowers were added to the existing plant cover, and with new plant species come new ecological niches. Some insects will take advantage of this opportunity to diversify and take advantage of these famous angiosperm plants. By the end of the Cretaceous, these plants had become the dominant plant group. One of the oldest is Archifructus, an aquatic plant. It is found in lakes and ponds. There are 3 known genera of Archifructus: Archifructus eoflora, Archifructus lianengensis, and Archifructus sinensis. They all have roots, lacy leaves characteristic of aquatic plants, flowers, and seeds. These plants generally measure less than 50 centimeters or 20 inches in height. As far as reproduction is concerned, these flowers fall into 2 categories. The first, counting Archifructus, lianengensis, and sinensis, has a male pollen-bearing plant and a female ovule-bearing plant. For eoflora, it's a little different. It includes both sexes. It is said to be bisexual. Montesecchia vidali is another aquatic plant. It was discovered in the Spanish Pyrenees, but was generally widespread in the Iberian chain throughout the Cretaceous period. Fossil specimens can be found in the province of Cuenca at the Las Hoyas site, for example. For the record, the latter has given paleobiologists and scientists a bit of a headache when it comes to classifying it. Fern, moss? In the end, none of the above. After several decades of putting the pieces together, it turns out to be an aquatic plant, and if the latest hypotheses are to be believed, probably one of the very first flowering plants on our planet. We owe this revelation to two great European scientists, Bernard Gomez and Veronique de Viero. Thanks to advances in analytical procedures and techniques, scientists can now put forward new hypotheses and study fossils in a whole new light. For this plant, for example, Bernard Gomez uses hydrochloric acid in very small quantities. Dosed meticulously, drop by drop, it brings to light a few millimeters of plant. It's as if a mummy of Montesecchia appeared after the scientists' work. From then on, new elements become perceptible, notably the plant's stomatal apparatus, which was previously undetectable. Why focus on this anatomical part in particular? Because it reveals the holes through which plants have collected the carbon dioxide around them. As with animals, these holes and the way they function will be very different in terrestrial and aquatic species. In the case of Montesecchia, the stomatal apparatus is perfectly compatible with an aquatic lifestyle. We can also see that this is an angiosperm plant, since the process also reveals fruits with a protective envelope called a carpel, which protects a single seed. These plants also benefit from smaller leaves, a much greater number of stomata and veins, and more efficient transpiration and photosynthesis rates. This type of plant has developed these capabilities, notably the fruit and the protective envelope for the seed and pollen, because the aquatic environment is hostile to these seeds. Thanks to the carpels, the seed is protected. During the Middle Cretaceous, as the climate warmed and sea levels rose, angiosperms occupied lowland undergrowth for the first time, in competition with ferns and conifers. Perhaps this is why plants evolved. Ongoing research will no doubt tell us more about this in a few years' time. However, if there's one thing that's certain, it's their usefulness in the ecosystem. The first to benefit from this new ecological niche are pollinating insects. In biology, we speak of coevolution. In other words, two species influence each other. There's competitive coevolution, in the case of the binomial prey-predator, or host-parasite, and there's cooperative coevolution, in the case of mutualist species, which is our case here. In this environment, already rich in flora and fauna, the pressure to make a place for oneself in the cycle of life is very strong. However, plants and insects form a strong team and will conquer almost all environments. Flowering plants need insects to thrive, so they need to attract them. To do this, and to be sure of attracting them, they will learn to show off. They'll sport pretty, colorful petals, shapes a little more extravagant than usual, exhale sweet perfumes, and even produce a sweet nectar that insects can't resist. Butterflies, wasps, and other insects already present are thus enriched with new traits adapted to their new environment. For example, nectar-sucking tubes gradually replace the mandibles of some butterflies. Angiosperms can also contain poisons, more often than gymnosperms, the plants with ovules. For them, it's a form of protection. But insects that manage to digest them benefit from new resources without competition. The bee, or at least its closest ancestor, also appeared during this period. The bee in question is Meletosfex burmensis. This insect is tiny, barely 3 millimeters. On more than one occasion, we've been surprised by the exceptionally large size of certain insects at one time. But in the case of our Meletosfex, it's quite the opposite. Its small size compared with our current specimens is quite astonishing. It belongs to the superfamily Apoideae, whose ancestors date back to the Jurassic period. In terms of physical characteristics, it's somewhere between a wasp and a bee. For example, its silhouette and anatomy are very similar to those of a wasp. But it also has branched hairs, which this time are more comparable to those of the bee. This Meletosfex found itself trapped in the resin of this plant. Unfortunately for him, he's living out his final hours. But we'll find him in amber, the fossilized resin in present-day Burma, in the Hukong Valley. He will become a privileged witness to the Cretaceous. He won't be alone, as other insects have suffered the same fate here. The ones you can see agglomerated with this amber are two species of ant. The first is called Hydomyrmecini. They're also known as hell ants. The second is the unicorn ant. Both will be found millions of years from now by researchers. Observing them on the same fossil site is a reminder of their kinship. The Apoidean family's closest relatives just happen to be ants. But back to our potential bee ancestors, Meletosfex, and pollinating insects. Initially, these insects were carnivorous and probably quite solitary. Then they specialize by type of flower. But of necessity, in order to adapt and survive, it's well known that there's strength in numbers. Eusociality thus became their best asset. Depending on their caste, insects specialize not by type of flower, but rather by usefulness to the colony. Some take care of the larvae, others build the nest, others defend it or go off in search of food. It wasn't until a few million years ago, in the mid-Cretaceous to be precise, that specimens capable of this kind of social prowess appeared. They belong to the Corbiculate tribe. This tribe included no fewer than 1,000 different species. While eusociality is a major development in some insects' ability to survive and adapt to their ecosystems, others have found quite different ways. Dragonflies and stick insects, such as Cretophasmomina melanogramma, prefer mimicry. They try to blend into the background to escape the sight of predators. This is also very effective. Some are such kings of camouflage that they are almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. Another way out is to live at night. At least that's what some specimens thought. No doubt they thought they could avoid predators, which are normally less active at this time of day. Once the ball of flying reptiles was over and the tree-dwelling animals asleep, these insects were free to roam as they pleased. Once the heavy march of the giant dinosaurs was over, it was soothing to return to the calm of the night, don't you think? Between those big predators, the pterosaurs that crisscross the sky, the tree-dwelling animals, veritable forest flyers with insatiable appetites, danger seems to lurk everywhere. Now that the moon has taken over from the sun, there's only silence surrounding us and the stars gazing down on us. All seems calm. Herbivores, carnivores, and insectivores are plunged into a deep, restorative sleep. All of them? Not quite. Look closely at the ground. Can't you detect a slight rustling and subtle movements in the undergrowth? It's a small mammal living in this vegetation cover, and it's probably just beginning to appear. It's rather stealthy, so you'll have to be quick and very observant to be lucky enough to catch a brief glimpse. It only dares to venture out of its nest at nightfall. He's sure to enjoy a hearty meal of insects of all kinds. It's easy to forget, when we think of the Mesozoic era still associated with dinosaurs reigning supreme over the land, that dinosaurs were far from the only inhabitants of our planet. While it's true that the dominant species during the Cretaceous remains the dinosaur, mammals still managed to make their mark on our world. Their way of life and physical capacities, at first sight rather weak compared to the dinosaurs, will ultimately be their greatest asset in resisting the mass crisis that will be raging in a few million years' time. But more on that later. For now, let's get back to our insects and our new plants. Insects are taking full advantage of the arrival of angiosperm plants, but they are far from being the only Cretaceous novelties. During this period, lianas, new types of shrubs and herbaceous plants, can be seen at the heart of this impressive forest. Time and again during our travels, we have seen that the use of the term herbivore was a mistake. Minimal perhaps, but a mistake nonetheless. Let's just say it was an abuse of language. To be perfectly accurate, the animals that preceded the Cretaceous period were vegetarians, not herbivores. Indeed, grass had not yet appeared on Earth. In the Cretaceous, however, things are a little different. Yes, herbaceous plants also made their grand entrance into the already rich realm of terrestrial vegetation, and the least we can say is that they too will manage to carve out a place for themselves within the plant kingdom, offering new opportunities for the animal world. Although they don't benefit solely from these plants, many snake species find camouflage and small prey in these herbaceous plants. These animals tend to be found in the humid forests of Laurasia. Before they took on the shape we know today, the first snake-like animals had legs at the back of their bodies. They were not very well developed, but were sufficiently articulated to move along the herbaceous carpet. They have an ankle and even a few toes. This is the case of Najash rheanagrina, a species of snake that still has its famous hind legs. It prefers to hunt at night and prefers small prey. For the time being, unlike today's snakes, it does not yet have sufficient skull mobility to gobble up larger prey. But it won't be long now. In a few million years' time, Titanoboa will be one of the most ferocious predators of its time. In the Cretaceous, while Titanoboa was not yet rampant, other large predators were prowling the land, sea, and air. They were omnipresent. It's time to go and find them, if you're adventurous enough. They're not nearly as charming as the cuddly cat who loves the living room sofa so much, but they're well worth the trip. Dinosaurs, like plants, evolved considerably during the Cretaceous period. They underwent numerous geological and climatic upheavals that forced them to adapt, and thus to migrate and evolve. Let's take a look at some of these new features in the almost dominant Cretaceous species, the dinosaurs. From the Triassic onwards, but especially in the Jurassic, dinosaurs took full advantage of their environment. This is still the case in the Cretaceous, where they continue their evolutionary radiation and have largely conquered the whole planet. Remember, in the previous period, we saw some very large specimens. Fully happy on the plains, they have continued to diversify and enrich their group. Specimens such as Ankylosaurus, Amargasaurus, and the famous Titanosauriforms appeared. The latter include Argentinosaurus, found in South America, and Paralatitan in Egypt. Titanosaurs are among the heaviest creatures ever to walk the earth. Argentinosaurs, according to the latest estimates, could reach 8 meters or 25 feet in height, 35 meters or 115 feet in length, and weigh almost 80 tons. Its tibia alone measures over 1.55 meters or 5 feet long. It rubs shoulders with another giant in the region, the Patagotitan, discovered more recently in 2014. It boasts the same exceptional physical proportions. On the African continent in Egypt, Paralatitan is no match for the grandeur of its American contemporaries. Estimates, as with many prehistoric animals, are regularly revised in the light of new comparisons, further fossil studies using today's technology, and new discoveries. In 2006, Kenneth Carpenter, a paleontologist at the Denver Museum in the USA, based a comparative study on another titanosaur, Saltosaurus. According to his estimates, our Egyptian specimen would be around 40 meters or 130 feet long, 7 meters or 23 feet high, and weigh close to 60 tons. Other parts of the world have also seen this kind of large size. In 2021, a team identified a dinosaur that was named Australotitan cooperensis. It is thought to be just over 6 meters tall, and its length is estimated at 30 meters or 100 feet. A beautiful baby, don't you think? But what happened to the big sauropods we met in the Jurassic? The animals we just mentioned will gradually replace them. Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus didn't make it to the Cretaceous. Other giants will fill their ecological niche. Energy requirements are high because of their size, and because of their diet, they have to eat a lot to meet their needs. So they're not picky eaters, feeding on a wide variety of plants. Cycads, conifers, palms, grasses, and even the ancestors of rice and bamboo are all part of their menu. They are also thought to have lived in herds. This is confirmed by the presence of nesting sites. Several holes were dug by the females to lay around 20 eggs before covering them with vegetation and earth. Their size was a potential hindrance to predators, but the most powerful and aggressive would stop at nothing. Take Abelisaurus, for example. To defend themselves, they had to live in groups. To increase their chances of survival, these giants also had skin covered with a kind of armor made of tiny scales. Let's move on from these herbivorous mastodons to discover another highly diversified Cretaceous group, the Ceratopsians. Marginocephalans are a group of animals that appeared in the Jurassic period. During this period, these animals were often bipedal. In the Cretaceous, however, they evolved to adapt to their environment, moving increasingly from bipedalism to quadrupedalism. At the same time, a new genus of Ceratopsians appeared. They moved on 4 legs and are more massive. They gave rise to numerous species and diversified greatly, especially in the Upper Cretaceous. These are the Neoceratopsians. One of them is well known to the general public and is undoubtedly one of the youngest dinosaurs. We're talking, of course, about the Triceratops. At 10 meters or 30 feet long, almost 4 meters or 13 feet high, and averaging 7 to 8 tons, the Triceratops is a very large herbivore that knows how to defend itself. Its head, which alone accounts for almost a third of its length, is quite impressive. Thanks to the large horn protruding from its snout above the nostrils, but also to the pair of horns located just above the eyes, it tries to intimidate predators who might have the audacity to attempt an attack. Unlike other ceratopsian specimens, the Triceratops has a very strong ruff that can also help it in combat. According to recent studies, the ruff and 3 horns may also have served another purpose. One hypothesis put forward by certain scientists is that these assets could also have served as an identity card between congeners, if you like. A process of identification was established to court or dominate another male. This theory is further supported by the later appearance of holes in the skull collar of Torosaurus, a species that was once thought to be separate from Triceratops, and which in the end was probably the adult form of Triceratops. An additional asset for courtship. To get around, this mastodon needed to be well supported on all 4 legs. It therefore has strong, powerful limbs. Its legs are also equipped with hands, with 3 fingers for the front legs and 4 for the hind legs. It walks on tiptoe with toes extended by hoof-like appendages. Some hypotheses also suggest that Triceratops is a social animal, living in herds or even with other large herbivores. But very few studies have been carried out on this subject. Fossil sites do not allow us to confirm or refute this hypothesis. While some specimens were undoubtedly feathered in the Jurassic, this characteristic is even more prevalent in the Cretaceous. This can be seen, for example, in a small dinosaur specimen compared to the Colossus we've just left. It measures 80 centimeters or 31 inches long and weighs just over 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds. This is the Microraptor. Fossil remains prove the presence of feathers all over its body, including its legs and long tail. In 2012, American and Chinese researchers succeeded in taking their investigations a step further. Microraptor's feathers were black, elongated and arranged in lamellae, but that's not all. This arrangement indicates iridescence, i.e., the ability to change color according to viewing angles or light. Shortly before, in 2011, in Canada this time, fragments of feathers, but also of hair, were found in amber. Feathers perform different functions in our dinosaurs. For some animals, this adaptation enabled them to withstand the long, harsh winters that can be severe in certain regions. This new physical attraction helps them to preserve and maintain their body heat, thus combating the harshness of the cold. For others, they are also used for flying. This is not the case for the vast majority of feathered dinosaurs. We speak more of gliding than flying. Over the course of evolution, however, things changed, and some species managed to flap their wings. Semicotopteryx, on the other hand, is one of the flightless dinosaurs. Nevertheless, it has found the perfect use for its feathers. It has a pygostyle, a bone in the rump of a bird that results from the fusion of the last caudal vertebrae. This little detail is particularly important in this pretty male specimen. In fact, thanks to this pygostyle and its branched feathers, he can produce movements with his appendage and thus attract the attention of females. Here we are again in the midst of lush vegetation in the heart of the equatorial forests. The plants benefit from the heat, but also from the heavy humidity. It's a godsend for these plants. Plenty of sun and light, always mild temperatures, and never short of water. Creepers, small shrubs, ferns, and flowering plants take full advantage of this paradise-like territory. You'd think you were in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, but there's no chance of encountering the animal just a few meters away. It's an Ankylosaurus. It's well known to the general public, and children are particularly fond of this dinosaur. It's his club tail that has made him famous. It's made up of bony plates. It's very heavy, as you can imagine. The animal measures almost 10 meters or 33 feet and weighs around 4 tons. His club is of course proportional to the rest of his body morphology and alone weighs at least 50 kilograms or 110 pounds. Is the legend that he uses it to defend himself true? This claim should be taken with a grain of salt. But there's every reason to believe that he used it as a defensive weapon. He transmits his strength to the tip of his tail and uses it as a club. Terribly effective, it's capable of breaking bones. Few opponents dare touch it. And if you look closely at the animal, that's far from its only asset. He's also equipped with a fine suit of armor. This time, it's not for offensive purposes, but to protect him from injury. Like his tail, the armor covering his body is made up of bony plates, dermal plates known as osteoderms. It also has thick scales and large horns at the top of its skull. Given all this defensive armada, it seems quite unassailable. He is surrounded by an impenetrable, unbreakable carapace. No fang could break through it. Yet there is a weak spot. It's the belly. On this part of the body, it has no protection and is therefore very vulnerable. According to scientists, if we compare it with current animal modes of operation and known defensive strategies, this large animal may crouch to the ground to protect this part of its body during an attack. As soon as it has the opportunity, it propels its club against the attacker, trying to be effective with the first blow. This particularity has come in handy when it comes to surviving in hostile environments, surrounded by large carnivores, each more ferocious than the last. Nature has enabled them to evolve and adapt, not only to their predators, but also to their environment. Our first dinosaur on this list lives in the USA. It's the famous T-Rex. The Tyrannosaurus rex is undoubtedly the king of the dinosaurs, and the most popular of them all. Although known since the 1900s, it continues to reveal new facets of its personality through new studies and analysis tools. The most terrifying and legendary predator of the Cretaceous still has plenty to surprise us. Let's start by answering one of the biggest questions about him. Why did he have such small arms? When you consider its imposing size, 13 meters or 43 feet long, almost 4 meters or 13 feet high, and around 10 tons of muscle, arms measuring just 70 centimeters or 28 inches seem rather ridiculous, don't they? And yet, nature is well done, and these had their uses. At first, researchers thought his arms were probably in the process of regression. They were of no use and in short doomed to disappear. But later research revealed that the arm bones had bony ridges that allowed muscles to be inserted. This time, the front legs were seen from a new angle. It finally appears that T-Rex may have used its small arms to balance its body and to dart off to chase prey. He wasn't the king of sprinting. Others were much faster. But capable of moving at 20 kilometers per hour or 12 miles per hour, he achieved his goals with relative ease. Another very surprising fact was revealed in 2014 by Canadian paleontologists. According to their studies, contrary to what you might think, this carnivore may not have lived alone, but in a group. Footprints show that these animals move parallel to one another. Is this an isolated case or a general one for Tyrannosaurs? Research is continuing on this subject. Finally, the T-Rex was not a cold-blooded animal, but a warm-blooded one. Its body temperature must have been between 35 and 38 degrees Celsius, or around 95 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately for the surrounding prey, their metabolism was very energy-hungry. It therefore had to eat a lot of meat to meet its vital needs. Speaking of meals, what did Tyrannosaurus rex eat? He wasn't a picky eater, attacking all kinds of dinosaurs, even if they were mainly ornithischians, herbivores for the most part. On the menu are ceratopsians, such as Triceratops, as well as Parasaurolophus and hadrosaurs. Let's leave the USA and head for another continent, Africa. Now the land of lions, it was once known as the land of Spinosaurus in the Cretaceous period. The Spinosaurus is one of the continent's great predators. Despite the lack of information about them, we do know that they were formidable hunters in their day. Spinosaurs have adapted to their environment, but also to the prey available. They can be piscivorous as well as preying on juvenile dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Armed with sharp teeth and quite active, They don't back down easily when faced with potential prey. How did it hunt? What position did it adopt to move or attack? The answers are still rather vague. Before 2014, posture was the subject of debate, for want of evidence to support one theory over another. Then, with the discovery of the hind limbs, the puzzle was put back together and new hypotheses developed. According to these elements, the quadrupedal posture is favored. The forelimbs were relatively short compared to the others, signifying a forward center of gravity. As for its environment, scientists believe that it was, like crocodiles for example, a semi-aquatic animal. But nothing has yet been proven, and research on the subject continues. Let's take a look at a European predator. This is the Archovenator, a member of the genus Abelisauridae. There's little doubt that it was bipedal. It had a large skull with short, sharp teeth. Its diet, on the other hand, raises more questions. It was undoubtedly a carnivore, but it could also have been a scavenger. His small arms and the 4 fingers of his hands, which enabled him to extract the viscera from dead animals, reinforce this theory. But it also had a powerful neck, which this time favors the predatory hypothesis. It could then have repeatedly bitten and weakened its prey until they succumbed or abandoned themselves to their sad fate. In Europe, as we saw at the start of our Cretaceous journey, the climate was very different from the one we know today in this region. The tropical climate offered lush, rich, and diverse vegetation, an ecological niche that favored the expansion of species such as Tyrannosaurs, like Extinction, but also Rhabdontidae, like Rhabdodon, and Nodosauridae, like Struthiosaurus. They fed on ferns, ginkgos, and chaoris. While these vegetarians and carnivores found everything they needed to feed and reproduce, others were unable to adapt to their new living conditions. The great diversity of dinosaur species doesn't mean that everything was easy for them. Indeed, for some adaptation was difficult, and for others impossible. Some species, despite being very well established during the previous period, eventually became extinct. This was the case, for example, of the Stegosaurus and the Allosaurus, 2 major Jurassic predators. A large number of species are renewed by the disappearance of other animals that were unable to adapt. All diets and environments are affected by these radiations and disappearances. Dinosaurs, although dominant during the period, did not all make it through the Cretaceous with equal ease. Another group of animals, sharing the territory with the dinosaurs, also faced obstacles to survival in this dangerous and hostile zone, filled with the most terrible carnivores the Earth has ever known. Despite everything, they managed to survive. These are the mammals. Nothing was won for them, and yet their group, of which we are a part, is still present on Earth today. Contrary to what we have long believed, mammals did not conquer the Earth once the dinosaurs had disappeared. Up until around 2000, the scarcity of fossil remains suggested that dinosaurs were omnipresent on Earth and undisputed masters of the land. Mammals, on the other hand, would have taken full advantage of their disappearance to finally establish themselves and dominate the world. In reality, however, things didn't quite work out that way. Despite their small size, they had prepared their weapons, if you can put it that way, long before the dinosaurs disappeared. these were effective enough for them to survive. One thing is certain: dinosaurs are numerous and widely present on Earth. But they weren't the only occupants of the planet at the time. Mammals have already established themselves on our planet. Unlike the dinosaurs, mammals are still very much present today and have conquered every environment: land, sea, air, forests, deserts, mountains. In short, they're absolutely everywhere. There are almost 6,500 different species on Earth today, in all environments. They didn't make much of an appearance at first, but it's quite an achievement to have made it this far when you consider what they had to go through. A great story for these animals. And yet, nothing could have foreshadowed such a bright future. Do you think you had even the slightest chance of surviving alongside the colossuses we met earlier? So how did the mammals manage it? Incredible as it may seem, it was their small size that was their first advantage, but also their way of life. In the midst of the fearsome T-Rexes and other giant carnivores, our mammals have indeed succeeded in imposing themselves, but not by becoming terrible predators. To live happily, let's live hidden, as the saying goes. And mammals followed this valuable advice throughout the Mesozoic. Fossils dating back to different eras of the Mesozoic bear witness to their presence. Adelobacillus was already on our planet alongside the first dinosaurs in the Upper Triassic, for example. Laulestes was also found in the Jurassic, but they're far from the only ones. We could also mention Haramaiada, as well as Kisho, Ambondro, Trecnotheria, and Eutheridae. More discreet than dinosaurs due to their much smaller size, mammals were still very present in the Cretaceous. Since the Triassic, they have diversified considerably and are increasingly numerous in a wide variety of forms and environments. Almost all diets can be observed, from vegetarians to insectivores. Far less frightening and seemingly less aggressive at first glance, they are no less dangerous for all that. At least for some of them. Rapenomamus robustus, for example, is quite similar in size to the opossum, but its courage is far from proportionate to its size. It doesn't hesitate to munch dinosaurs if necessary for its own survival. Indeed, the remains of a Psittacosaurus, a herbivorous dinosaur, have already been found in the stomach of a 130 million-year-old fossil specimen. Not all mammals were affected by this diet and this particularity, but it's important to know that these species could also prey on certain members of the dinosaur dynasty. Mammals are characterized not only by their fur, but also by their ability to generate their own heat. This is an extraordinary evolution for the living world. These animals don't need to capture the sun's rays to store heat. The other thing that all mammals of this era have in common is their very modest size, almost all of them around 10 centimeters at most. They resemble small mice or shrews. This flaw, or weakness if you like, is actually an asset, as it allows them to slip more easily into their environment. Between the dinosaurs that largely occupy the plains, the pterosaurs that have invaded the skies, and the marine reptiles that have conquered all the world's waters, it's hard to get around in such a hostile and dangerous environment. Unless you're small and fast. Thanks to this morphology, they are almost invisible, so they are hardly noticed by the giant carnivores they live alongside. But that's not their only particularity. The vast majority of them are also nocturnal animals, and that changes a lot too. While large predators move about during the day, small mammals hide in small shelters. In the earth, but also in the surrounding vegetation, digging burrows and galleries. Protected from predators, they can stay this way for hours without being seen or caught. When night falls, mammals can emerge without risking their own survival. The expression, "when the cat's away, the mice will play," takes on its full meaning here. Our first mouse-like land mammals take advantage of the sleep of large predators to go in search of food, with a light heart and a serene mind. They generally feed on insects of all kinds. Once their bellies are full, they quickly find their shelters. They'll wait for the sun to set once more and come out under a beautiful starry night. But to hunt so well at night, our Cretaceous mammals have evolved new abilities. Yes, living at night isn't for everyone. They have something that many Cretaceous animals don't: highly developed hearing. While most animals can only rely on their eyesight in the dark, mammals can have total confidence in their ears. This hearing has evolved thanks to the appearance of tiny bones in the ear. They are quite difficult to see on such small fossil skeletons, but they are nevertheless very important and mark a real turning point in the evolution and different radiations of mammals. Different types of mammals can be observed in the Cretaceous. The Harameidas, for example, which appeared as early as the Triassic and are still present in the Cretaceous, are a clade of squirrel-like animals with a long cat-like tail. They have not yet evolved to the point where they can hear and live at night. However, they manage to survive thanks to their arboreal lifestyle. They feed on plants, but also on fruit, seeds, and even insects. In case of danger, some members of this clade, such as Arbora harameia, Villavolodon, or Myopatagium, can rely on the skin membranes called patagiums stretched between their limbs. These enable them to glide between two trees. We can also mention Zolombolesti, which looks a little like a shrew. Just 20 centimeters long with an elongated snout and well-developed eyes, it had teeth that enabled it to feed on a wide range of insects. Like most of their congeners in the same group, they are small animals, so they don't need very large quantities of food to survive. Again, this may seem an insignificant detail, but it's one of the reasons why they were able to survive easily in the midst of the dinosaurs, and also what will help them overcome the coming crisis. But we'll come back to this in the chapter devoted to the latter in a few minutes' time. Let's take a look at another member of the mammalian family. This is Chronopio dentiacatus. It belongs to the Dryolestioidea clade. It lives in the Upper Cretaceous and benefits from the evolutions we detailed earlier. First of all, it is small in size, comparable to a modern mouse. It has a slender snout, well-developed round eyes, and long canines for feeding on insects and small invertebrates. It can also hunt small vertebrates like this member of the Lacertilian family, for example, which could very well be our Chronopio's next meal if their paths cross. But what's most noteworthy about him is the evolution of his skeleton, and in particular his skull. In particular, we can see the squamosal bone. This skull bone, found in the temple region, is essential for the temporomandibular joint, which will influence its ability to hunt and feed, but it will also house the hearing organs with a tympanic cavity. And now let's go to the ocean. Under the waves, there have been some significant developments. The marine world promises some wonderful encounters. That's if your heart's in the right place, of course, because the creatures that reside in these marine lands are far from peaceful. Around 140 MA, the climate warms up. Water temperature, logically enough, also benefited from this rise in temperature. Warmer water means an abundance of marine microorganisms, especially plankton. Plankton is a godsend for the marine environment, with all marine organisms benefiting directly or indirectly from this abundance of microorganisms. Life abounds at every level and in every form, from echinoderms such as starfish and sea urchins, to sponges, invertebrates such as corals, crustaceans, and mollusks, right through to fish. Other aquatic animals, notably sea turtles, appeared at 100 million years ago. Like other marine reptiles, they could reach gigantic sizes during the Upper Cretaceous, up to 3 meters or 10 feet long, and 5 meters or 16 feet wingspan for Archelon, for example, which is quite similar to today's leatherback turtles. The two families we know today, Chelonidae and Demochelidae, already existed in the Cretaceous. In fact, these families include the loggerhead or hawksbill turtle and the leatherback turtle, respectively. And of course, there are always fish. All over the globe they abound. Some rays and sharks rival mega-predatory reptiles. Giant sharks, such as Scaponorhynchus, reach lengths of almost 5 meters or 16 feet, while Otudus approaches 6 meters or 20 feet. Around 100 million years ago, giants such as Ledsictus were also observed, reaching lengths of over 15 meters or 50 feet. Yet it feeds on plankton, proving that a carnivorous diet is not necessarily a prerequisite for exceptional size, even at that time. Others of average size are no less formidable carnivores. For example, Encodus, found in North America and the Mediterranean, really skewers its prey, such as cephalopods and other small fish, thanks to its long saber-shaped teeth. We have already discussed marine reptiles at length in the Triassic and Jurassic periods. During the Cretaceous period, these animals are still very much present. All of them? Not quite. Remember, we talked about the fragility and decline of some of them in the Jurassic period in particular. The Cretaceous period brought their demise. Do you remember which marine species we're talking about? It's the ichthyosaurs. Although scientists have put forward a few hypotheses about their disappearance, it's still difficult to formulate any real answers. Ichthyosaurs may not have made it this far, but others are making the most of their environment. Plesiosaurs are rampant. But mosasaurids are also becoming the new terrors of the seas. Plesiosaurs are animals characterized by a massive body, 4 identically sized swimming fins, and above all a huge neck, extended by a small head. In a way, they're a cross between a snake and a turtle, but XXL in size. The all-time champion in terms of neck length is undoubtedly Elasmosaurus. It has between 70 and 72 vertebrae, depending on the scientific source. Either way, it's a record. Its long neck represents almost 2/3 of its total length. It is estimated to be around 10 meters or 33 feet long, with a neck length of 7 meters or 23 feet. The male just in front of us is, like his congeners, perfectly adapted to aquatic life, despite his imposing size. He's long and definitely heavy, between 2 and 9 tons, and he has a streamlined body and powerful swimming legs. It is a very good swimmer and quite active. If it didn't swim fast, it could swim for a long time. During the late Cretaceous, the American West and part of today's Midwest were covered by a shallow expanse of sea. It was in this region, present-day Kansas, that the very first fossil of this dinosaur species was found by Edward Drinker Cope in the 1860s. Since then, a great deal of investigation and research has been carried out on this very special dinosaur. Although it was aquatic, like some of our marine mammals, Elasmosaurus breathed air at the surface. He was not equipped with gills, but with lungs. So, depending on his estimated lung capacity, he would ascend perhaps every 10 to 20 minutes to take a deep breath of air. Legend has it that this dinosaur is the Scottish Loch Ness Monster. Plesiosaurs are very diverse, including Hydrotherosaurus, which fishes with its 6-meter or 20-foot long neck. But there are also members of the Mosasaur group in the vast ocean. Tyrannosaurus will be the Mosasaur effigy of our Cretaceous journey. Tyrannosaurus is a marine reptile that is actually quite similar to a monitor or snake. It dominates shallow waters and was one of the dominant predators of the period. It is very imposing and can reach 12 meters or 40 feet in length. Its skull alone measures over 1 meter or 3 feet. A ferocious predator, it was also very aggressive with its direct competitors. Paleontologists have found traces of lesions, notably on the snout bones, which suggest quite violent battles with other large predators. In the remains of Tyrannosaurus stomachs, scientists were able to observe how dangerous and powerful they were, attacking all kinds of prey. These included Elasmosaurus, our great plesiosaur, as well as sea turtles, sharks, other mosasaurs, and seabirds like Hesperornis. In short, nothing really stood up to him. If he had to get his head out of the water for a fraction of a second to tackle a pteranodon in the middle of a fishing trip, he wouldn't hesitate for a moment, and he'd make mincemeat of it. This unfortunate pteranodon will serve as our transition to the conquest of the Cretaceous sky. Let's take a look at how these flying reptiles managed to serve over the period and how they evolved. Some of these sky gods, the flying reptiles, continue to evolve. Indeed, they were still widely present in the Cretaceous period. But competition, even in the air, is fierce. Some species, notably those that appeared in the Triassic, are slowly declining. This is the law of nature. Not all species manage to adapt sufficiently to retain their place in their ecosystem. The first birds did appear, and to say the least, they adapted to their ecological niche and to specific climatic and geological conditions. As proof, they are still with us today. small pterosaurs are gradually giving way to these famous birds. Others, the largest specimens of pterosaurs, are taking full advantage of their extraordinary capacity and have less direct competition. Yes, these giants of the sky are rarely insectivores. They grow to exceptional sizes and prey on prey that matches their physical capabilities. Quetzalcoatlus is without doubt the largest pterosaur of all time, at least according to our current knowledge. Imagine 3 cars lined up lengthwise, or a bus with 4 axles. The latter could fit between the 2 wingtips of this giant reptile. It's almost unimaginable to think that an animal with such a wingspan, 16 meters or 53 feet wide, could fly, yet it was indeed the case. On the ground it walked on all 4 feet. Footprints confirm this. As for flight, it turns out that it could take off from the ground with a jump, then operate a beaten flight, i.e. with repeated flapping of the wings. Scientists still have some doubts about its diet. The fossil remains were found on land, not near the sea. We can therefore rule out the piscivorous theory. Perhaps it was a scavenger? Unless it captured freshwater prey or small vertebrates. Others believe that the combination is also possible with a mixed diet of prey and carcasses. Let's take advantage of the discovery of these flying reptiles to evoke another member of the great family of sky gods, the first dino bird. Archaeopteryx is an avian dinosaur and one of the very first to be discovered. A feathered dinosaur with a bird-like appearance. We can already see in this specimen elements comparable to our present-day birds, such as the proportion of wings. However, it is not clearly attributed with the origin of birds. Research on this subject is ongoing, and the elements in our possession do not allow paleobiologists to determine exactly whether this is one of the first direct ancestors. Generally speaking, there are many areas in which Archaeopteryx is the subject of scientific debate. How it flew, for example, or how it took off is still very unclear. We know very little about its way of life. Some agree, however, on the possibility that it lived in trees and fed on insects. Its muscular strength is indeed quite weak compared to our birds. Living in an archipelago of islands in the tropical seas, it may also have fed on fish carcasses or worms. Nothing is less certain. In the category of avian dinosaurs, we can also mention other, more or less well-known specimens, such as Iberomessornis romerali, discovered in Spain, or Confuciusornis. The latter was modest in size, measuring around 50 centimeters or 20 inches, and weighed no more than 1.5 kilograms. It's a rather paradoxical specimen. It is both a little more evolved than Archaeopteryx in some respects, and considered more primitive in others. On its skeleton, for example, we can observe the pygostyle, the famous fusion between several caudal vertebrae and a sternum. These elements are essential for the attachment of muscles useful during flight. Another peculiarity is that it also has a large cartilage that could have attached the pectoral muscles. On the other hand, it retains large claws on its front limbs, and its skull is less developed and more primitive than Archaeopteryx. Unfortunately, most of the animals we have encountered so far apart from mammals and certain avian dinosaurs in particular, will disappear within the next few thousand years. The Upper Cretaceous is coming to an end, and a terrible biological crisis is starting to unfold across the world. Although far from being the only extinction event, indeed it's already the fifth in our planet's history, the one that marks the end of the Cretaceous and the beginning of the Paleogene is the most popular of all. It marks the end of a whole section of our planet's history, that of the Mesozoic era. The Cenozoic, our era, will begin on the ashes of the previous era. Like all extinctions, it is still very difficult to establish their origins, millions of years after the events took place. As our knowledge evolves, but also as new discoveries are made, hypotheses are sometimes confirmed, sometimes refuted. Added to this temporal break are multiple causes. We sometimes imagine that such a catastrophe is sudden, rapid, and the result of a single event. On the contrary, the causes are often multiple and extend over a very long period of time, sometimes thousands of years. In the case of the Cretaceous, there have been many hypotheses, and these have been the subject of much debate. Nevertheless, as paleontological, archaeological, biological, and even geological investigations and studies have progressed, many elements converge towards some of these hypotheses. Perhaps because, despite the millions of years that separate us, this crisis remains the closest to our current period, the vestiges of this event can still be observed in the four corners of the world. A volcanic eruption has irreparable consequences. 65 million years ago, in India's Deccan Traps, several volcanoes erupted. The problem was that this eruption lasted a very long time. It lasted between 300,000 and 1 million years. Thick smoke then penetrated the atmosphere, causing acid rain. But this is not the only plausible cause, according to scientists. During the same period, scientists also suggested the impact of an asteroid the size of Mount Everest. In one of the Earth's geological layers, 65 million years old, iridium was found, which tends to prove the impact thesis. Iridium is a very rare material on Earth, but it is widely present in the universe, notably in certain metallic asteroids. We also know that at the same time an impact took place in Mexico, at Chicxulub. The impact crater measures 180 kilometers in diameter. Plunged into darkness, battered by dust, gas, and acid rain, the living world suffocated. First, the blast. It's immeasurable. Fauna and flora are swept from the surface for hundreds of kilometers around the point of impact. As a domino effect, earthquakes, tsunamis, and incandescent debris are propelled into the atmosphere. From then on, there's no stopping the biological catastrophe that's about to unfold. Thousands of tons of this incandescent debris, dumped into the atmosphere, fall back onto the ground of our blue planet, which literally bursts into flames. Fires start everywhere. Millions of hectares of vegetation perish under the flames, as do many animals that are unable to escape such a blaze. You'd think that was the end of it, but it doesn't. As we said earlier, a crisis lasts for a long time. While the consequences for flora and fauna are already catastrophic, nothing is over yet. On the contrary, this is only the beginning. Dust accumulates in the atmosphere, preventing light from reaching the ground. Plants, deprived of their beneficent sun, can no longer use photosynthesis as a source of energy. Unable to adapt to such conditions, much vegetation disappears. The gases released into the atmosphere as a result of the impact and the various eruptions will lead to acid rain. The first to be affected are plants, but soon, large herbivores are also affected by this new catastrophe. Our travels have shown us time and again how important every link in the chain is. The large herbivores take their toll on the carnivores, who can no longer find enough food to eat. It's a veritable hecatomb. While some animals become scavengers, and were able for a time to feed on all the unfortunates who perished as a direct result of these catastrophes, nutritive resources soon ran out again. Death once again befalls the last survivors. In the ocean, marine animals are no more spared than those living on land or in the sky. Acid rain, of course, affects all the world's waters, as does ash fallout. The more fragile plankton is soon in trouble, and at the same time, so are the many species that depend on it. Vegetarians and carnivores alike are gradually sinking. Thousands of species, whether on land, at sea, or in the sky, will succumb over the millennia to this massive catastrophe. They find themselves powerless in the face of these new climatic and geological conditions. The food chain is completely broken. Unable to feed and drink to meet their vital needs, they perish one by one. One group, however, manages to survive despite all the disastrous consequences of this unprecedented crisis. You probably guessed it, the mammals. Of course, some of them will also disappear, but a few will manage to survive. As we have seen, small mammals are able to live at night. This permanent lack of light is therefore not a problem for them. They can orientate themselves and move around despite the lack of light. The sun brings light, but also heat. In addition to darkness, which can make life on Earth impossible for many species, cold is also very difficult to overcome. But mammals are animals capable of generating and maintaining their own heat. Once again, these skills enable them to fight for survival. Their small size and modest need for food also enable them to sustain themselves with greater ease than large animals, which require astronomical quantities of plants or meat to meet their energy requirements. While the Mesozoic is often referred to as the age of the dinosaur, the Cenozoic is known as the age of the mammal. Only crocodiles, turtles, lizards, and snakes, and certain families of mammals and birds survived the crisis. Mammals will then become a very important species in this new era that is taking shape. But that's another story, another journey.